Hi, Jordan.
Yeah.
To Perth Dialogues.
Hey, Nirmal. Thanks for having me today.
I came across your profile and I've been following Libertarian uh, platform for some time now because the thing which I liked the most about you was your or the party's position of getting into 20% tax flat and then reduce it down to 10%. And I've always had this policy with me forever. Also, because all religions say that. My Sikhi says 10% of what you earn to the community. I think Muslims have zakat, which have the same concept. 10% give it to community. So this is the exact taxation rate that we should have, that we give out 10% to the community.
Yeah, well, this is a big foundational element of the libertarian philosophy and consequently the Libertarian Party is this idea that at the moment, what we have is a system where the government will take, 40% of everything you earn. Really, it's closer to like 47%. We have insanely high taxes. The government will take that and then they're going to take care of you. You get to keep 50%. We're going to take the other 50%. We're going to spend 30% on you, and the other 20%, it just kind of disappears. We're going to pay bureaucrats to count beans or whatever it might be. We libertarians believe that I've got a better idea. Let's reduce that taxation from arbitrarily, we'll say 50% down to 20%. That other 30% that people for some reason want to give to the government so that the government can take care of them, either for healthcare or retirement, whatever it might be. You have that 30% and you spend it on those things that you want. And there's this really important Friedrich Hayek economic principle whereby because you're the person spending that money on the thing that you want, you really consider how you're going to spend that money and you reward the other person that you're giving it to. That every dollar is a vote. However, the system that we've got at the moment does something quite different. They take your money, they spend it in a fashion that they say they think is in your best interest. Because you're spending someone else's money, or rather because they are spending somebody else's money, they are not nearly as considerate with it. They will waste your money. Government waste is a massive issue. We are currently at 1.05 trillion worth of debt. The net debt is around about $680 billion, but the real debt is 1.05 trillion. And that's because not only will government spend your money, it will spend your children's money. People that are not even born yet are being born with $40,000 worth of individual debt. And that is insane. So they've just released this latest budget and they talked about intergenerational inequality, which is this focus group tested buzzword. And if they really cared about the next generation, they would not be ladening them with an ever higher national debt. That's a long way we've taken a bit of a tangent from the initial economic taxes that we started with. But so it is foundational to the libertarian philosophy that we reduce government spending, we reduce government taxation, and you spend that money as you see fit.
So on that note, would you like to introduce the listeners and viewers on what exactly is the Libertarian Party's platform?
Yeah, so the Libertarian Party is founded on the libertarian philosophy. The libertarian philosophy is essentially, most people are actually familiar with all the elements of the libertarian philosophy. They just might not have come across the word libertarian. We are classical liberals in that sense. However, the word liberal has sort of taken on a new meaning, particularly in America. And Australia is a little bit downstream of American culture. So these days we might call our liberal uni students, they might be the people who are actually in favor of socialism, which is, worlds apart from what classical liberalism actually is. So we libertarians, we've taken on this new name, but we're essentially classical liberals. We believe in small government, low taxation, free speech. Those are the libertarian three big things. We want a smaller government. So the government's going to do a lot less. Just focus on the things that governments are originally meant to do, the things that people originally instituted them to do, such as protecting your private property. That means that you need police. Protecting your national borders. That means you need some sort of navy, defense force, those sorts of things, roads, rah, rah, rah. So the government would do a lot less. And because it's doing a lot less, it needs a lot less tax revenue. So that's our second point, which is reduce taxation. If the government's not spending as much, it doesn't need to take as much of your money. So we want to reduce taxation. I mean, I personally find taxes quite egregious. I don't use the term, I don't think taxation is exactly theft, but I do struggle to find a way that doesn't look a lot like theft. I think that the government is the biggest gang in town. And because we vote for it, it's got this air of legitimacy whereby they take what you what you make, and we all just think this is normal because we've been brought up this way. And in many respects, it is normal. And our third thing is free speech. We are staunch, I won't say free speech absolutists, I will say First Amendment absolutists. Now, obviously, Australia doesn't have a First Amendment. We don't have a Bill of Rights in Australia. We're a constitutional monarchy. The United States is obviously the First Amendment that I'm referring to, and it protects, free speech, religion, and the right to petition your government, which is protest. And that is a really important thing to us. We think that it is foundational to a society that the right to free speech is protected. So those are our three biggest elements. We've got many other policies on all different things that you could talk about. But I think it would be fair to state that we are sort of Menzies era liberals. Menzies was the guy who founded the Liberal Party. And that's the quickest way that I could communicate it. But if you really want to summarize the Libertarian Party, I would say it like this. If it neither breaks my leg nor picks my pocket, it's none of my business. And I think the government should treat you the same way.
Wonderful. It's so interesting that when I came from India to Australia, India has the situation where it taxes only about 5% of the population, widest tax net. And that taxes are used to feed or support, not feed, even feed actually. They are actually feeding 80% of the population. That's how the social welfare in India works. And I was looking at the numbers in Australia, and it's almost like the same. The top 5% of income taxpayers pay about 40% of the income tax receipts. And that money goes to fund almost 60% of the Australian budget, which goes into actually welfare. That's all welfare. That's how it is. I'm saying, how different is Australia to India now? It's almost the same thing.
It's interesting that the, quote unquote, the rich get attacked so much. And I don't want to go into bat or defend, quote unquote, the rich per se, because I don't think they need any further defense. They're fine. But it's funny that we attack them saying, we need to tax the rich. In reality, if you actually want to run the financial costs and benefits, the rich are actually paying more than their fair share. The rich pay. And once you break it down and include transfers whereby money is taken from one person, who is in this case the rich, and given to somebody else in the form of welfare, once you include that, the poor, like the bottom 50%, are actually net negative. They are takers of tax. They're not actually paying any tax. It's not something I generally talk about because it's not going to ever win you votes or sympathy to say that, the poorest among us aren't contributing their fair share and the rich are actually paying more than their fair share. But once you actually do the numbers, that is actually the case. Nevertheless, I don't think that I'm not in favor of, corporatism or cronyism or the rich being able to buy politicians. I think we're all offended at the idea that the rich or some politically connected and financially powerful people would be able to influence our democracy. I'm as offended by that as anybody else. Cronyism is a disgusting disease on the liberal democracies of the Western world. But comparing it to India, I know a little bit about Indians or the Indian taxation system and the Indian economic system. I understand that opening a business in India is incredibly difficult, and that if you're not willing to grease palms with cash, you can be waiting over a year in order to start a simple business. But if you've got that money and you're willing to pay, you can get your business up and running in just a few weeks with a rubber stamp from the appropriate bureaucrats. And that's a terrible way to run a system. I think we're all offended by that as well. And rightly so, we should be. The rules should be fair and transparent. And by fair, I mean they should be written out in plain in Hindi or English, whatever your language is of your nation, and they should be applied equally and fairly across people. Sorry, I used fair in the definition of fair, but I mean it should be applied equally to every person without fear or favor. There should be no prejudice. So the interesting thing about India, so far as I understand it, is that it liberalized its economy in 1991, and as a consequence, it reduced a lot of regulation, it lowered some taxes, removed tariffs, that sort of thing. And the sad thing is that Australia, and as a consequence of that, which is fantastic, India became slightly more prosperous from 1991 onwards. The sad thing is that Australia is trending in the opposite direction. Recently, we've decided to centralize and increase bureaucracy. There's red tape and green tape for everything. We are heading towards pre-1991 India, whereby you need a seal of approval from a government official just about to do anything. And it's the opposite. It's a planned economy, and it's a terrible thing to do, and it's going to make us a lot poorer. And the next generation is going to be much worse for it.
The only thing I can say about comparing India and Australia is, and I've seen both, and businesses as both, is both have got so much of regulations and laws. The only difference is in India, you can pay a bribe and get ahead in life. In Australia, there is no bribe. You have to keep waiting and following that reams and reams of paperwork and inspections, and you have no solutions.
Yeah,
That's the difference.
And it's an interesting thing that you say there, that at least that there's a solution in India. Now, I don't like the idea of it even being a possibility. It sort of offends my senses of fairness that we could introduce such a thing, into Australia, where it's, we've got this is the rules, but if you pay the express fee, you might get it done faster. I dislike that idea. I like the idea of rules being fair across the board. Everyone plays by the same rules, and that's the way that society is and should be. But you're right, at least in India, you have a solution to get through all this, cut through this red tape. But I think the solution to that is, the libertarian position is that we should reduce the size of government, reduce the number of agencies in Australia, also reduce the amount of red tape. The amount of red tape that you have for something as simple as buying a house. Well, I say simple, it's not simple in Australia, simply because of all the red and green tape. We've got stamp duty, and there's many other building regulations when it comes to building a house in Australia that drive up that cost and slow the process down. A lot of those regulations are necessary and useful. They mean that we've got good quality homes, but a lot of them are not necessary and useful, and they really slow down production. And as you know, we've got a housing crisis in this country, and I think that a lot of it is due to a combination of NIMBYism and government intervention into a market. We don't have a housing market. We have a housing permission system in Australia, and that is causing our housing crisis.
Good that you talked about housing, because this whole latest budget has been seemingly designed around solving that housing crisis. I don't know how the government solves the housing crisis by taxing people $77 to $80 billion over the next 10 years, but that's what the government is saying. What are your initial thoughts? We'll go into detail, but what's your initial thoughts when you saw all the news and changes that coming in the budget?
Albanese could have won the next election if this budget was better. But this budget, they focus group tested this term of intergenerational equality, thinking that they could justify any tax using this buzz phrase. And the fact is they can't. You cannot make everything cheaper by taxing us more. They talk about how, the government's going to raise, $70, $80 billion over the next, 2-3 years through its taxes. I don't think that's something to boast about. That's terrible. That's $70 to $80 billion you've taken out of the Australian taxpayer's pocket. That's $70 to $80 billion that we, the people, could have used to fund and buy housing. My God. And yet they seem to think that, they deserve a pat on the back for raising government revenue. I don't want you to raise government revenue. I want you to raise the people's revenue. But you're not. You're taxing it. You're taking it away. I had that money. Now I don't. Who's got it? You. You took it. It's terrible. So the solution to this, I think, first of all, you need to elect different politicians. They have different agendas. The Labor Party of Australia, I don't like using, naming and dismissing, but they are social democrats. They call themselves socialist democrats. In their constitution, it's in the first sentence of their constitution, we are social democrats. So they're socialists, which means that their mindset is that the government can centrally plan and organize an economy, which it cannot. Friedrich Hayek proved that. He won a Nobel Prize for it. And the second idea is that the money that you and I have is fundamentally owned by the government. And that's not true. You and I are the people that create the wealth. The government takes it. Politicians, they take your money and then they spend it on you on the things that they think you want, and then they ask for a pat on the back. And then when they give you a little tax cut, like we have the fuel excise tax, they act as if it's generosity. It's not generosity to take less of my money. If I came to your house, Nirmal, and I was going to take $100, but I only took 50, did I just give you $50? Was that generous of me? Of course not. We all know that I just robbed you of $50. But the government does this, and we all give them a little pat on the back and we vote for them at the next election. It's a terrible mindset that we have somehow conditioned ourselves to have. But the fact of the reality is this is our money, and if we had it, I could pay off my home loan a lot sooner. But if I circle back around to what we were talking about, which is the housing crisis, the fundamental problem, right, is as simple as supply and demand. House prices or prices in any area are a reflection of supply and demand. If supply is down and demand is up, then the price will be high. If demand is low and supply is high, the price will be low. It's as simple as that. If the price is high right now and you want to lower it down, which I do, even though that would negatively affect me as a landlord, the solution is to increase the housing supply. How do you do that? Well, first of all, you could cut red tape, regulation. That would allow builders to build more and build more easily. You could cut taxes, both on the building sector and on individuals. If the building sector has to collect less taxes on behalf of the government, because to be clear, builders do not pay taxes, they collect them. You and I, the consumer, the final consumer, always pays the taxes. So governments do this thing whereby they'll say, oh, we're going to tax, let's just pick Coles. We're going to tax Coles and the food industry. They're a big corporation, a dirty monopoly, duopoly, and it's fine to tax them. Well, you'll never tax Coles. You'll only tax the people that shop at Coles. Coles will collect the tax. GST, right? The price of the product might be $1, and then GST is 10%, which means you're paying $1.10. So who's paying that 10 cents? Well, it's you, the consumer, because the GST is tacked into the price. We all know that when we go to the store. It's the price plus GST. So businesses don't pay taxes. They collect them on behalf of the government. You and I, the consumer, we're the ones that pay the taxes. So if you want to reduce the price of housing, something that the government could do right now is remove stamp duty. That would reduce the cost of buying a house massively right now. Now, people often say, well, if we get rid of stamp duty, what are we going to replace that shortfall of revenue with? Well, the libertarian answer is no. You don't remove one bad tax and replace it with another bad tax. That's the wrong idea. You remove one bad tax and then you reduce government spending, okay? Now, a lot of mainstream economists will agree, stamp duty is a terrible tax because it's a tax on transfers, and that instead we should move to a land tax. Now, do you know what a land tax is, Nirmal?
A bit of it, yes.
Let me just recap it for anybody that's listening out there. A land tax essentially turns you into a permanent renter. Now, economists like this idea because it frees up, it gets rid of stamp duty, it frees up mobility issues, and it also incentivizes proper use of the land. If land is really valuable, then the tax will be high, and if you are not making proper productive use of that land, then you'll be encouraged to sell it, because each year you have to pay a yearly fee or a tax to the government based on the value of your land. That's what a land tax is. So each year you have to pay your land tax, and it's calculated based off the value of your land. The only way you're going to make the tax payments profitable is if you're able to produce more from that land than the cost of that tax. And thereby, if you are not producing enough from the value of that land, you'll be encouraged to sell it. It's kind of like running a house at a deficit. You don't want to do that. So that people like that idea because it means that the value of land moves from low where it's less valuable to where it's more valuable. The thing that I dislike about it is that it turns you into a permanent renter. You can never own the property. Every year you have to pay the government. What happens if you don't pay the tax? What do you reckon happens now?
The cops will be at my doorstep very next day.
You're on the money, mate. You understand the game, right? The cops will be there to collect their piece of the pie. And we know what will happen because land taxes have been instituted all around the world. There's plenty of countries that use them. Now, stamp duty is a terrible tax, but land tax I find egregious. I find it morally reprehensible because what has happened in America, in many states where they have a land tax, where people have, I shit you not, people have not paid by $1. They've sent a bill of $1,000. Someone paid $999 and somehow missed out $1. The government has taken their house and sold it from underneath them. And you might think, well, that can't be quite right. There has to be a little bit more to that. I promise you, if you look into these stories, it is true. Now, there's a little bit of a caveat where, the council sent a letter, the person didn't see the letter, but at the end of the day, they took that person's house, sold it out from under them for the cost of $1. Is what could happen to Australians if they ever fall for the idea of a land tax. Now, fortunately, nobody's proposing this idea at the moment, but I warn Australians, be wary of anybody that suggests that the land tax is a good idea. No, you will never own your property. And I think that you need to own your property. Libertarians are big believers in private property, not just in the housing sense, but in the sense of the self-ownership. But part of that is owning your castle. Your house should be your castle. This is where you can go and feel safe. It is yours. And if you own it when you're 65, 75, 85, you don't have to worry. No matter what happens in your life, no matter if you get sick or you're on your deathbed, you still have a roof over your head. But if you still have to pay a land tax every year, $1,000, $10,000, whatever it might be, there's somebody that wants money out of you and you might not have the money to pay it. So beware, people, of a land tax. Essentially, to solve the housing crisis, you need to increase supply and demand. Well, we could talk about that slightly differently if you like.
I would differ there. We
Yeah.
have a land tax in Australia, and which is called council rates.
Council rates?
So if I have my house next door is a empty vacant lot, but the person still has to pay rates on it, even though he's not getting any cleaning services or anything. It's an empty lot, but he still has to pay money on that. For what? And if you miss your council tax or even a part of it, the council can come and take your house. So we still have that. It's just expanding to the state level and the federal level.
That's a good point. You know, councils, they do demand their rates, their monthly rates, quarterly rates, whatever it might be for your district. And if you don't pay them, you're going to have a problem. I find them slightly less threatening, probably because councils don't have direct control over police. Just as you've pointed out right there, if the government were to institute this at the state or federal level, then you have to worry about state and federal police enforcing that law.
Yeah.
Councils have a lot less power and their jurisdiction is limited. So I find it less of a concern, but I still take your point that we do essentially have something that represents a land tax right there. And yeah, that's a concern.
Okay. On the budget side, let's talk about the good thing, which I see as a fiscal bribe that the government is giving in terms of trying to reduce the income rates at the lower margins from 16 to 14, 15, and then 14, saying everyone is a winner, where everyone will get $250 working tax after 2 years or maybe after 1 year. And so now I don't have to reduce taxes to the higher end. Like if I'm paying $95,000 tax, I'm not worried about $250 tax rebate, the benefit you're giving me. So
Yeah.
I'll take all the taxes here, but I'll give you this much here. That's what I think of it. What do you think of it?
Yeah, so that's exactly correct. At the moment, the federal, the lowest bracket tax is 16%, and the latest budget reduces it down to 15% next year and 14% the year after that. As I said at the start, libertarians are always in favor of lowering taxes. We have never voted for an increase in taxation, and I don't think we ever will. I think that that's a good thing, but they are hyping up how much it's really helping. Because it's in the lowest tax bracket, they get to say, oh, look, we're helping the poor, the lower end of the economic scale. Now, at some point in every person's life, you will be in this lowest tax bracket. And the reality is every year I'm in that tax bracket. I then just pass it at some point. Do I think it's a good thing? Yes, I think it's a good thing, but it's not nearly as good as what they're hyping up to be. In reality, the capital gains tax discount that they've removed and the other taxes that they've increased are going to reduce economic growth and economic prosperity, and that's going to hurt the people who are in those lower margins the most because there's going to be less job opportunities. Our solution, the libertarian solution, is a tax-free threshold of $50,000. At the moment, the tax-free threshold is about $18,200 if I've got my numbers right. So a tax-free threshold of $50,000. You don't pay any tax on that first $50,000 that you earn. After that, we institute a 20% flat tax. That means we don't have progressive taxes. Not that I think that's the right term, but it is the economic term. We don't have a progressive taxation system whereby as you earn more, as you produce more in this country, you're taxed at a higher rate. We think that that's, again, morally egregious because why would you punish someone who's being more productive? Now, people tend to reframe this and say, well, they're making too much money. Well, hang on. You make money as a consequence of being productive. It's the production that happens first. And you don't get rich by just taking money from other people. You get rich by satisfying their wants and needs. People give me money when I make them happy, when I conduct business. They never give me money if I make them unhappy. So if you've got money, it is evidence that you have provided goods and services to somebody else, and you are yet waiting to expect those goods and services in return. Each dollar is an IOU. And if you've got lots of IOUs, it's because you have produced more or given more to society than you have asked for in return. So I don't believe in a progressive taxation system. We advocate for a flat 20% tax, and that would allow Australians to keep more of what they've earned.
I've got two views on that progressive taxation. One is that I have already done the work to earn that money, but I'm not getting the benefits out of it. So why would I do that kind of work next time, which is actually killing the aspirations of me to rise in my life? And the second thing is, if you make someone to work but not give them the fruits of their labor, we have a term for it, which is called slavery.
That's exactly right. And I love that you said that before I did, because normally libertarians get a little bit picked on for being too principled in the idea of self-ownership. But I love that you said that. So we've just talked about, the libertarian taxation policy, which is tax-free threshold of $50,000 and a flat tax of 20%. Me personally, what I would actually like to advocate for, and this is a personal level, this is not the Libertarian Party, I believe there should be no income tax because of the reason that you've just stated. I believe that because you own yourself, you own your labor cannot exist without you. You own the fruits of your labor, and therefore the fruits of your labor are an extension of yourself. For somebody to come and take a piece of your labor at the end of the day of work, that is theft. That is turning you into a partial slave. And at the moment, Australians lose about 34% of their yearly earnings to the government. That means that you work for 1/3 of the year for the government and don't take us home a single dollar. If you work a 9 to 5 from Monday to Friday, it's not until like the end of Tuesday, the start of Wednesday morning, that you start working for yourself. The first 2 days, you just worked for the government. And I think that violates the principle of self-ownership. I am opposed to that. So we want a lot less taxation for that reason. And I'm glad that you said it first. I'm glad that you're joining the Libertarian Party, mate.
Yeah. Actually, this is what I wrote in one of my posts recently, that migrants come to Australia because we know that the baseline of why Australia allows migrants to come in is to tax them more because they are net taxpayers. There is a Treasury report which says that across all kind of migrants, the net benefit to the economy is $41,000 across the lifetime. So we know why we are getting the migrants in. And there's another report which says that an average Australian takes from the economy about $89,000. So you need someone to fill that gap. That's why migrants come in. And we know we are here to pay taxes. But is there a limit to pay taxes?
That's an interesting idea. At what point do you pay too many taxes or enough taxes? That's something I'm going to give more thought. But on your point about immigration, it's funny in a sad way at the bad rap that migrants get for Australia. At the moment, they're blamed for everything. And there's this weird situation where migrants are said to have been taking our jobs and also be dole bludgers. So apparently they come to Australia and they're on welfare and they're also taking all the jobs. So which is it? Are they on welfare because they're not working, or are they taking all the jobs? So I think migrants are an easy scapegoat for a lot of Australia's problems. And all those problems, I would say, are caused by the government. But that is the typical libertarian belief, is that the government causes more problems than it solves. Nevertheless, migrants, I think, are used by the government. So in macroeconomic theory, all you need to do in order to raise prices and increase GDP is to have more buyers. And one way you can have more buyers is to import more people. And if you can't import more people, then you need to breed more people. Now, Australia's natural birth rate at the moment is about 1 point, I think. It's below 2, which is below replacement level. The only reason that Australia's population is growing is due to migration. And I don't think that's a good thing. I think that the Australian people, for some reason, have been browbeaten so badly they no longer want to reproduce. Think about what you have to do to an animal in a zoo to make it so unhappy that it doesn't want to reproduce anymore. For some reason, that has been done to the Australian people, the Australian taxpayer. We no longer want to reproduce. The only way to increase our population is through immigration. I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think it's sustainable. However, don't misunderstand me. I would happily say that my best friend is an Australian migrant. He migrated to Australia technically only about 4 years ago. And tomorrow I will be flying to Spain to officiate his wedding. Uso is one of my best friends, and yeah, he's a migrant to Australia. I love that guy so much. So yeah, migrants are fantastic people. And the way that I would like to, or the way that the Libertarian Party would like to change migration is a fee system. So we believe that Australia is owned by the Australian people, and we're big believers, as I've said, in private property. Australia belongs to the Australian people. Australians have been paying taxes, which fund our roads, hospitals, schools, rah, rah, rah. For somebody to come in and start taking advantage of our roads, schools, hospitals immediately after having paid no taxes doesn't seem fair to us. It seems like someone is using the resources that you have built over time. So we advocate for a significant fee. You could essentially think of it as a catch-up tax to come into Australia. This would do a couple things. One, it solves that moral issue of someone using something they haven't paid for. And two, it provides a certain economic barrier, financial barrier to someone coming into Australia. It ensures that they've got significant buy-in into the country. They really want to be here. They've contributed a significant amount. You know that someone who came to the country and gave $60,000 to the government really wants to be here. They're committed to being in this country. And it also weeds out people who are not economically productive. Obviously, nobody wants anybody to come to their country, whichever country it is in the world, and be a dole bludger, take from the welfare system, take more from the system than they are paying into. So because they are coming to this country and they're productive, we expect them to continue to be productive. They were productive in the country before. They come to our country, they continue to be productive. However, one thing I would like to say as the counter argument to what I've just stated here is this economic idea coined maybe about 15 years ago. Because Western countries such as Australia only allow the most productive members, remember, I've just advocated for a system whereby we only allow productive people into Australia. Because Western countries have a system where they only allow productive people from other countries, such as doctors, engineers, highly trained, highly skilled people to come into their country, it negatively affects those home countries where those people came from. Because, let's pick a random Cambodia. Because Cambodia spent all this money training this person to be a doctor, the person's finally able to treat patients and they leave the country to come be a doctor in Australia. Well, Cambodia has now lost a doctor, and this hurts the country and holds it back over time. And so there is this other argument due to brain drain that you should limit immigration and prevent the most productive people from another country coming to our country because it hurts them. It's negative foreign aid in that sense. Me personally, what I want in Australia in terms of immigration is just people that love freedom and want to come to this country to be free and advance freedom. And if you're in favor of liberty for the individual, and if you're in favor of small government, I want you here in my country.
I'll give you a much worse outcomes of the Australian migration on the home country. For example, I came to Australia. Okay, I'm here. I made a good life. I'm contributing and become an Australian. But Australia doesn't allow my parents to come in on permanent basis. So they are stuck there in their old age with no one to look after, with no social security, with no aged care and nothing. You separated a family and left the old parents to die somewhere so you can benefit from the young ones. That's what migration is.
Yeah. And do you want your parents to come to Australia?
They can't come. There's a wait period of 50 years.
50 years? I didn't realize that. Yeah. Immigration is not something I'm heavily tied to. However, as I said, I don't believe in open borders or an open border policy. A lot of the time, libertarians take that position. That's not our party position, and that's not my personal position either. I don't think we should have open borders. Yeah. So as for your parents stuck home in India or stuck in India, what's the Indian government's solution to an aging population?
They can't do anything. Aged care is coming in now, but then again, it costs money and it's not there. It's starting to, people are thinking about it, but nothing there.
Well, who do you think should fund the aged care? Do you think it should be the taxpayer contributing to a pool and then it's a government-run service? Or do you think that service should be private? Do you think that, the next generation should look after their parents and pay for their retirement home or live with them in their home? What's your opinion?
In Australia?
In any country, what's Nirmal's ideal outcome?
So my view is that the person is not the unit of the society or government. The family is, which means we take care of each other. Mm-hmm. An Australian definition of family is the parents and the children. My definition of family is the parents, the working parents, and the children. So grandparents, parents, and children. What Australia has done is it has broken up that unit, sent the children to childcare and start charging them, sent the parents to aged care and started charging them, and separated the husband and the wife to work together and tax them both.
Yeah, we have created a system where we just get taxed and separated at every step of the way. Well, on the childcare thing, the price of childcare is exceptionally high in Australia. You need a university degree just to look after children. What a load of baloney! And it's a perfect example of red tape that is not necessary. It's a government requirement that you have a university degree in childcare before you're able to look after children. Bull dust. You can pay a 16-year-old girl down the street to look after your kids, no worries. Your grandparents will do it for free because they love your children, all right? These sorts of things have been done for literally thousands of years, where the next generation is looked after by the previous generation. You don't need to pay them. You don't need a degree in that. All you need to know how to do is make up some baby formula and keep them away from sharp objects. Okay, so it's a perfect example of how government's getting in the way. And then the worst thing is the government will take your money, fund childcare, and then tell you, look what we've done for you. We've made childcare cheaper. No, you haven't. You took from me $20,000 this year. You spent $10,000 of it on childcare. What did you do with the other $10,000? Well, you had to pay some bureaucrat to administer the system. You had to pay some other bureaucrat to count the administration of the system and enforce regulation. Well, I've got a better idea. How about you keep your $20,000 this year and you can spend it on childcare as you see fit? Do you want to pay your grandmother to look after your children $10,000 a year? I bet she'd be happy to do it for $10,000 a year or even for free. So that's my libertarian solution. I think that it brings the family closer together. And I think that government-run education or government-run childcare is a terrible thing that separates children from mothers and families from each other.
I did a whole podcast on this childcare issue with bringing in more options and for the families in childcare system. And one of them is that allow the parents to do that work. But there's another figure. Childcare in Australia is almost $16 to $24 billion industry. We have created that thing. It's not going anywhere.
I didn't realize that that's how much of our economy was going to looking after children.
Yeah.
That's quite that's quite a substantial amount of money that could be put to other productive uses.
It is. Next on the budget is the capital gains reform, and which is a big one. The last government, when the changes were made, they did a good reform. They said, you don't need to keep a track of all the inflation figures that your income is growing or the business is growing. You don't need to go to an accountant. The government has to do a lot of things. You have to do a lot of things. The business has to do a lot of things. Lot of paperwork. We'll get rid of everything and we'll give you a standard fixed 50% CGT discount. Much better system. Now the government comes and says, the current government, and says, no, we'll go back to that previous thing. You keep a track of all the inflation, you do all the paperwork, and then we will tax you on the remaining one. But if you do get to lower your taxation even by the new method, we are still going to impose a 30% effective tax gains.
That's correct, yeah. So capital gains tax was introduced back in 1985 under the Keating administration. Then it was changed substantially in 1999 under the Howard administration. He introduced a 50% capital gains tax discount for any gains made after if you'd held the investment for more than 12 months. The idea there is simple. They didn't want to encourage short-term trading. So that's why it had to be for more than 12 months. Now, the latest budget, not that this is passed into law yet, but they're proposing we go back to the old system whereby we have it's indexed to inflation. Now, I like the idea of indexing to inflation. However, removing the capital gains tax of 50% and moving back to indexation for inflation, as you said, increases the amount of financial bureaucracy or the amount of financial literacy that you need in order to calculate the taxes that you quote unquote owe. And one of the most, the sneaky thing that they tried to slip in there was the 30% minimum taxable floor. So as a consequence of that, whilst you are able to only be allegedly taxed on the real gains, because there is that 30% minimum, it means that you can end up paying more tax than what you've actually earned as a real gain. Now, I'm using some economic jargon here. Some people won't understand it, but there's a difference between nominal gains and real gains. So essentially, you might make a $100,000 investment. It might grow to be worth $150,000. But if inflation was so high that $150,000 only buys the same amount as $100,000 did 2 years ago, then you haven't made any real gain. You can still buy the same number of loaves of bread, right? So you want to be able to tax only real gains. Indexing it to inflation is typically a good idea, but because of the way they've done it, they've increased burden and bureaucracy and financial literacy, which is a bad thing. We libertarians, we dislike capital gains tax altogether. So we would get rid of the capital gains tax in its entirety. I find it disgusting. It is a tax on the same economic productivity twice, taxing the same dollar twice. So if you go to work and you earn $30 in an hour, the government's going to take 30%. Because that's what they take. You're left with $20. If you forego instant gratification and don't use $20 to buy, alcohol or clothes, whatever might make you happy, but you instead delay that gratification, invest that $20 into the market, and it grows to be worth $40, and then the government were to tax that $40, well, it would be taxing the same economic productivity twice. Because it was a fixed amount of labor that went in to create that value to begin with. They'd be taxing it twice, and we'd be opposed to that. So our solution is to remove the capital gains tax altogether. So what do you think about that, Nirmal?
My general view is that the government in totality across all taxation is saying you keep remaining as a worker. You shouldn't have an aspiration to get into a higher tax bracket first. Second, if you spend every money that you earn, there is a center link or the social welfare system, welfare net, which will catch you at every point wherever are you in your life. But if you try to make any save from your income after paying all the taxes or your life expenses, if you try to save anything, for example, I came to Australia, I worked harder, my wife worked harder, we bought our first home. Now we are stable. We have paid off our first home in the first 10, 15 years. Now I've got some extra money. I want to go and save that into an investment property or into shares, anything. The government says, all right, you shouldn't have that aspiration, and that's why we are going to tax it more. So if you spend everything, we are here for you. But if you want to think about yourself and save for the future, we are going to tax you more.
Yeah.
That's in my nutshell.
Yeah, and I find that disgusting. My parents, they don't drink, they don't smoke. Two incredible people. They've worked all their life. My father lost his job when I was about 9 or 10. I didn't really understand what that meant at the time, but it clearly had an impact on me because I'm very concerned about job security all the time. My father built a business from, I would say, nothing. And as a consequence, now when he's 65 and retiring, he's a comfortable man, relatively wealthy. The government didn't help him any step of the way, and they want a piece of it at every step of for every dollar he makes. Why is it that my father is punished at every step for being a productive member of society, paying his taxes, contributing, doing all the things you're meant to do, never violating the law, never hurting anybody else, only ever producing and providing for his family and for society, and yet the government wants to tax and take his retirement? He spent the first 30 years paying taxes, thinking that he was going to get a government pension because that's what was promised to him at the time. No, when he's 30 years old, they said, we're getting rid of the pension system. You're going to be on the superannuation system. Now he pays into superannuation, not voluntarily, but compulsory. They say, we're not going to tax that. Guess what? They changed the rules. Now they're going to tax his superannuation. My father gets less of it. So he tries to move it into a self-managed super fund so that he's able to use his money before he dies. No, they're going to crack down on that. They want to tax your money going into superannuation, which they said they wouldn't do. They want to tax it coming out of superannuation, which they said they wouldn't do. The taxes keep changing, and he's a productive member of society. And then you've got these other people who are on welfare, taking taxes their whole life. And what happens at the end of their life when they haven't produced anything or been a valuable member of society? When they turn 65, they receive the government pension that my father has been paying for this whole time. How is that fair? How is that right? It's not fair. It's not right. Yeah.
The government actually also says that we are going for intergenerational equity, whatever that means, because how can you compare someone who's at the fag end of their working life to someone who's starting their life? How do you compare those two? It's not equal. There is no equity, intergenerational equality, and those two not had the same views. The Australia is different, the taxation system is different, and how do you compare those two? And if you actually want to compare those two, you give the same benefit that you got or the older generation has got to the younger generation.
Yeah. I find
you are grandfathering all the tax benefits to the older one, so he's a double loss.
Yeah, that's exactly.
So he's not getting the benefits, but he's still at a disadvantage compared to the person who has already got the benefit.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Intergenerational inequality was the buzzword, created it in order to justify further taxation and further spending. It's a load of baloney. As I said at the start, if they really cared about intergenerational inequality, they wouldn't be spending trillions of dollars of the next generation's money. But it is a ridiculous idea that we should be comparing somebody who's at 45, 55, 65, the higher earners of our society who've been in the workforce for 25, 30 years, have experience and qualifications and knowledge that an 18-year-old cannot have. Why would we compare these two people's economic existence? Of course, they're not going to have the same equality of outcome. But the younger person has a much better chance to have a more comfortable and fruitful life than the 65-year-old. When my parents grew up, they didn't have the internet. How is that generationally fair? It's not. And it's a ridiculous question to even ask. Why would we care if my parents didn't have the internet when they were growing up? It doesn't matter. It's happened. But the idea that we're going to compare somebody who's at the end of their working life with someone who's at the beginning of their working life and find that these two people are equal is a ridiculous idea. But it's the buzz phrase that's been used to justify taxation.
The government also says that by removing the negative gearing and CGT from the existing housing, they are pushing towards people towards the new builds, which will build more housing. From your libertarian standpoint, do you think the government should have this right to use the tax codes to guide the society from here to here to here to here?
No, we libertarians, we dislike the idea that the government is going to meddle in the economy. They are distorting signals when they create money through inflation. They distort price signals when they try to fiddle with the tax code to get you and I to do this or that. We've got what we call in Australia sin taxes, where it's a tax on alcohol or a tax on cigarettes. Now, I don't like people smoking, but I don't think the government should be using taxes to try to sway you to buy a house here or to invest shares over there. It distorts, and especially when you can't plan for what tax changes they're going to create, it distorts signals and makes it difficult to allocate resources effectively. A free market is much better than a planned economy. And our government, particularly the Labor Party, seems obsessed with the idea that they can plan an economy and fix this solution and nudge your solution. Every solution that they provide creates another problem. Nirmal, have you ever heard of the Cobra problem?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, you're from India, but you probably know the Cobra problem. So for any listeners out there, this is the classic economic story that explains unintended consequences. Now, it turns out that it may not be factually true, but the premise is the same. And not the premise is the same, but we can use an example from Georgia, Texas, where where the exact same story happened with pigs or with rats. So the story goes, there's lots of cobras in Delhi, the capital of India, and the colonial powers at the time don't like the Cobras on the streets, so they introduce a bounty. And sure enough, after a year, there's no more Cobras on the streets. But for some reason, the government is paying out more and more bounties than they ever had before. And they thought, how is this so? There's no Cobras on the streets, which is what we wanted, but we're paying more and more money out to people for every snake that they bring us. And so they conducted some inspections, and sure enough, they found that the industrious people of India had gone into business, and now they've caught all the Cobras in the streets, and they're breeding them in their houses in order to collect the bounty. And of course, this is the opposite of what they wanted to happen. And well, they feel like they're being ripped off, so they say, no, that's it. We're going to end the bounty. These snakes are now worthless. Well, what do you think the Indian people did with all these worthless snakes taking up space in their house? They released them into the streets. That's right. And as a consequence, the government has accidentally incentivized the very thing they were trying to get rid of. Now, as I said at the start, this turns out to be maybe a little bit more folk story than fact. It's hard to pin down the details, but it absolutely happened in Vietnam in 1902 during the Black Plague. The same thing. The French colonial government at the time thought that they could get rid of the rats which were carrying the Black Plague by paying people $1 for every rat tail that they brought them. Well, what do you think the people did? They caught the rats, they bred them, they cut off their tails, and they kept breeding them. They would catch and release rats after cutting off their tails and hand in the tail for the bounty. And as a consequence of the government's intention to reduce the number of rats and their poor understanding of economics, they ended up increasing the rat population in Vietnam. And the same thing happened with pigs in Texas, in America, and has happened many times over. The point is that this government creates problems and then thinks they can solve them by introducing another law. But every law comes with another set of unintended consequences. And the funny thing about unintended consequences is that you don't know what's going to happen. They are by their nature unpredictable. If we could predict them, people would try to write a law for those. And guess what would happen? Those laws would have an unintended consequence. So no, the government is not going to solve this problem by creating another tax, trying to nudge you to buy this property or that property. I think the reality of removing the capital gains tax and instituting the new taxes, grandfathering in the old rules for previous investors such as myself. So for the rest of my life, as long as I hold my investment property, I'm going to reap the benefits of negative gearing. That has allowed me to get, ahead in life, become slightly wealthier. And now the next generation, my friends who have not bought properties yet, they don't get to take advantage of this tax break that I get. If they buy a property, they either have to buy a brand new build in order to get the incentive, but they can't afford their first house. So they're not going to be buying existing builds and renting them out. This is going to reduce the supply of rental housing out there. It is the perfect example of pulling up the ladder behind you. The government has created a system where you and I, who got in first, were able to get ahead in life by taking advantage of the system. And now we are destroying the system that allowed you and I to get ahead. And the next generation are screwed. If you stick with this government, you're going to be screwed. You need to vote for parties that are in favor of freedom, in favor of lower taxes, because no country has ever taxed themselves into prosperity.
Another aspect is that the government is saying that they are going to solve intergenerational equity by making these changes. And I was thinking that you have actually created two set of classes in the economy where someone already has investment properties and they are getting benefits, and the someone who can't get those benefits and they can't get into investment properties in the residential market at least. Already the two classes which have been created. The second is, if I already have investment, you talked about unintended consequences. If I have investment property, why do you think I'm going to sell my property just because you change the laws? I'm going to jack up my rentals to make up for the loss.
That's exactly correct. And you've touched on a point that I made earlier, which is that businesses don't pay taxes, only the consumer does. So you and I, as landlords, we own houses. And if the government were to increase the taxes on us, what would you and I do? We would pass those tax costs onto our tenants. The landlord's not going to pay those. The landlord still has to make repayments to the bank. Do you think I'm just going to eat those costs? No, I'm going to pass those costs onto the tenant. Anytime the government tells you we're going to tax this business, we're going to tax that landlord, we're going to tax that sector, it is taxing the consumer. Whoever buys from that sector, that is the person that is going to pay the tax. Okay, don't believe this bull dust that the government tries to pit businesses against people, and and they stand in the middle and reap the benefit. It's the government that raises all the revenue, and it's the consumer that pays the cost. But yeah, you and I take advantage of negative gearing, and they've increased capital gains tax. I believe the capital gains tax is also grandfathered in for you and I because we owned property before the July 1st budget announcement. But if they were to change it, I would not sell. Because of the changes, I'm not going to sell my property. I've got this permanent tax offset that's grandfathered in. Capital gains tax is increased and it's a bit up in the air. I don't know exactly where it's going to land, but I've got no incentive to sell my property. I stand to pay more tax. Why would I want to sell my property?
On the negative gearing aspect, so what does negative gearing property provides? Rental housing. 30% of Australia lives in those rental housing, which still doesn't provide fully for the cost of maintaining those houses. That's why we give negative gearing. So, all right, you're not making that money, so you can reduce some of your other income taxes.
That's
so
right.
You can still keep providing those rental incomes. If I went into a business and I have one profit-making outlet or a shop and a loss-making shop, I can manage or combine the profit and loss from those two shops in my overall business. Why is government not allowing that if I have one income from wage and one loss from some other thing? It's the same thing. I'm trying to combine two sources of income into one. You allow that combination in a business or somewhere else, not in this area. Why create two classes of people?
That's exactly correct. I'm in favor of negative gearing, and most people don't understand how it works. Now, if my sole job, if the only way that I received income was through as a landlord, say I'm the monopoly man and I own 10 houses and I receive income as a consequence of rent, that would be my income, and we would tax that according to the income brackets. But for some reason, if I work as a firefighter and I also was able to save up enough money and try to get ahead and invest in the future, and I bought a house in order to provide a housing for somebody else, for some reason, the income that I get from that stream needs to be taxed a different way. Why? I think it is perfectly reasonable that there is this ability to combine all of your income into one big income and then tax that appropriately, offset losses from this area with gains from that area, such that you are paying for just the profit you have made, because apparently that's what's justifiably taxed is profit, not just revenue. So profit is a consequence of revenue minus costs. That's how we calculate profit. Obviously, that makes sense because if you just tax revenue, well, your costs might exceed your revenue. You might be taxing someone that's losing money, which as the hardship of their life. So I think it is perfectly reasonable to combine it all and to keep negative gearing. The libertarian solution to this would be not so much that you reintroduce negative gearing. It would be such that you all of your income would just be considered income, wherever it comes from, whatever source it comes from. It's just income as far as libertarians are concerned. And again, we would just have a tax-free threshold of $50,000 with a 20% tax after that. It seems reasonable and it's simple. Now, one of the really important things about that, compared to the latest budget that's been produced, is the complexity of the new budget and the budget rules compared to our system, which is just how much did you earn minus 50,000 times it by 0.2. That's how much you send to the government. That is a simple system. You don't need a tax accountant. Tax accountants should not exist. All right. Now, I'm sorry to all the tax accountants and my tax accountant. All right. I really like Matt. He's a good guy. But they shouldn't exist. The tax code should not be complicated and so complicated that you need a specialized person just to navigate it. Do you know how many taxes there are in Australia? There are 125 different taxes. Now, 3 of those taxes make up 80% of the government's revenue. That is income tax. It makes up like 40%, stamp duty, and I'm going to forget the third one right now. Might be capital gains tax, might be something different. The point is that you could get rid of 122 other taxes and you would only lose 20% of the government's revenue. But think about all the regulation that exists due to those taxes. People need to be compliant with those taxes because you and I know what happens if you don't pay your taxes. The guys with guns rock up and they take you away to prison, as if that somehow makes the budget better. So So, and some of those taxes actually cost the government more than they raise. Some of those taxes might bring in 0.1% of the government's revenue, but they cost billions of dollars in order to execute in compliance costs. And it's just a terrible thing. So why don't we get rid of 122 other taxes, keep the 3 that generate 80% of the revenue, and we'll reduce the burden on businesses and compliance and make the whole system simpler.
For me personally, and this is a personal opinion,
Mhm.
I view accountants, lawyers, and lobbyists as the cost of business. The bribe that we used to give in India, it's the same price of lowering my taxes and getting the benefit out of the government that give me this thing, give me this thing, give me this thing, allow me to do this.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, and I would say it's quite correct. In the West, we tend to think that we're more civilized because our corruption is different. You know, we don't have police on the streets that will let you off the hook if you just slip them $100 bill. What we have in Western countries, I'll use Kamala Harris as a perfect example. Do you think Kamala Harris knows anything about the Australian housing market? Of course she doesn't. She has no idea about the American housing market. But she finished her time in Congress and she came to Australia last year in Brisbane. She gave a conference to a bunch of rich investment bankers who paid her $500,000 to give them an hour-long speech about what the Australian economy should do about our housing crisis. First of all, they are investment bankers. They have degrees in economics and finance. They know what Australia should or should not do about our housing crisis. Do you think Kamala Harris knows? No, but that is our form of corruption in the West. We will pay someone to come and do something useless, and for some reason that's much better than just giving her the 50 grand and telling her go away. Okay? We could have saved all of us a lot of hassle. We wouldn't have had to organize some useless convention in Brisbane. All of those investment bankers could have gone to work that day and done something useful. But instead, they took 3 hours out of their day to listen to Kamala Harris rant about housing in Australia, which she knows nothing about and probably didn't even write her own speech, couldn't answer questions about her speech. That's how we do corruption in the West. So you're quite right to say lawyers, accountants, these are the people that we pay in order to grease the palms and get things done in Australia.
Let's come to the most controversial and the most technically complex and the inheritance tax which is built into the budget, the tax on the trusts.
You're right. Yeah, this is a complicated part of the budget. Let me please finish your question.
So there's about 700,000 discretionary trusts operating in Australia. The government says the use of trust is only to safeguard assets, but they are created for tax saving purposes as well, which is evident from all the Labour politicians and MPs, and every MP for that matter is using trusts to buy houses. Not a problem in that, or invest anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think 30% tax on trusts is not leveling the playing field, but an inheritance tax, a death tax?
You know, it's funny. Once upon a time, trusts were something that only rich people had. You know, if you heard someone that had a trust, it meant that they were connected and they understood how the financial system works. These days, I've got a friend up the road. He's definitely not financially literate, but he has a trust. The sad thing is, it's another example of this government pulling up the ladder behind them. So once upon a time, only the rich had trusts. Now it's starting to make its way into, you know, the common man like you and I. I don't own a trust, but I could definitely see that I might get one in a year or two. But now the government has introduced policy to prevent you and I, or to reduce the incentive for you and I to use it. Jeff Bezos had a trust for years that allowed him to get incredibly wealthy. Why can't I use the same system? Well, I can't use it anymore because they've changed it and they're going to tax us more. It's not a good thing. Now, on the trusts side of thing and the death tax side of things, Topher Field did a great video on trusts and death taxes. Now, death taxes or inheritance tax or estate taxes, these are all synonyms for the same thing. I, as a libertarian, am entirely opposed to them. Once again, it's a system, or it's a tax where the government taxes the same dollar twice. If I've got any savings in my bank account, those savings only made it there after they were taxed. So every dollar I've got in my savings has already been taxed. When I die, I want my money to go to my wife or to my children, right? That's pretty standard. Why should the government then step in and tax that dollar again? It shouldn't. It's immoral. It's taxing me twice. It's theft at that point. And why should anybody else get to say what I do with my money when I die? It's my final wish that my money goes to my wife and my children, but you're going to step in and take a piece of it? How disgusting. At what point is my money off limits? I already paid taxes on it the first time when I earned it. I don't think you should have been able to tax it then, and you did. And now, when I'm dying on my deathbed, you're going to tax them again. Okay, so, but what are we going to do about this? Well, now that the tax code has changed, you and I are going to act differently. As a consequence, when I get closer to my deathbed, I'm going to start moving money around such that in order to reduce taxes, we will find out what the negative unintended consequences of introducing a death tax or taxes on trusts will be in 10, 20, 30 years time. What are people clever rule? The government seems to think that if they create a rule, people are just going to abide by the intention of the rule. People will change their actions based on the new rules of the game. But on the trusts side of things, when you die, when you die, your money temporarily goes into a trust. And as I said, Topher Field did a great video on this. So everybody is going to be affected by these trust taxes. Even you and I that don't have a trust. Well, I don't know if you don't, but I don't. So I don't have a trust right now, but when I die, my money will temporarily sit in a trust, and the government for some reason thinks that they can tax it again. I think that's immoral. I'm totally opposed to death taxes. I will be to the day I die.
Your policy, the libertarian policy, I looked up on your website. It says that tax every operating business, whatever the formation is it a corporation or a trust or discretionary trust or whatever, 20% flat rate.
Mm-hmm.
Would that solve this problem forever, that whatever is however you are earning money, we tax you equally, so you choose how you want to go and which one you want to go?
Yeah, I think that our policy of a flat tax of 20% would solve a lot of problems. The biggest problem that I think would probably be missed by a lot of people that it would solve is the fact that it would reduce compliance costs in a massive way. Yes, we would reduce the amount of government revenue, but we would also reduce a lot of costs for compliance. If the government no longer has to check whether you've made $18,099 or $18,200, it's a huge, and as you move through the different brackets, your taxation changes. Without having to do all those complex calculations, now you can get rid of half of the, what's our version of the ATO? Half of the ATO, well, more like 90%. You've got thousands of employees working for the ATO. Why do you need so many employees? One of the strangest things that happens every year is when you and I go to file our taxes, we tell the government how much we owe them. And then if we get it wrong, we get a bill in the mail saying, hey, you calculated it wrong. Well, who's calculating how much tax I owe? Are you calculating it or am I? If you're calculating it, why are you asking me how much I owe you? Okay, so just one of us calculate it. That person, we then pay the bill, and that's that. So I think that simplifying the tax code has so many knock-on effects that are beneficial to the Australian public and to our spending from the Australian government. That it would be a no-brainer if there were any brains in the Australian government at the moment.
Another thing which the government is saying is that it is bringing in all these tax changes to introduce more productivity in the economy. What it does is, and I think is, if you put more taxes on me, I'm not going to be more productive. I'm going to find more ways to not give you that tax legally.
Yeah, that's correct.
Reduce my taxation. How is that productive? Instead of me working to earn more, I'm trying to save a bit of tax. How is that productive?
That's exactly right. What you're touching on is called the Laffer curve. It's an economic term created by the economist Laffer. I think it's Arnold Laffer, whereby at 0% tax, the government collects zero taxes, and at 100% tax, the government collects zero taxes, because nobody's going to work if 100% of their income is taxed. So somewhere in there is the optimal range for revenue for the government. Now, I don't think that the government should try to optimize revenue. I think that it should take the minimum amount in order to fund the necessary requirements of society. I don't think it should take any more than that. But what you've said there is exactly correct, that as the government taxes you more, you are disincentivized to work. I know it from my own life experience that when I've worked 3 or 4 overtime shifts in a week. By the time they offer me the fourth one, I say, no, it's not worth it. I won't see $1 out of that paycheck. Now, people are going to push back and say, well, Jordan, what are you talking about? You might work overtime, but each dollar is taxed at, 47%. You still stand to gain 50 cents. Yes, but it's not worth it to me to make an extra 50 cents on the dollar. Now, if I was making 80 cents on the dollar, I might decide that it's worth my time. But at some point I go, you know what? I've made enough money this week. It's not worth it to me. And I go home and I don't do the overtime and that work doesn't get done. So the idea that the government is going to introduce taxes to increase productivity is ridiculous. Now, they could try and make the argument that they're going to introduce subsidies to increase productivity, but subsidies are just a negative tax, and all it's doing is moving money from one place to another. So yeah, they'll point to the iron ore sector picking up, but it's at the expense of the productive economy over here. So the government cannot give you something that it didn't first take from somebody else. So the idea that they're going to subsidize our way to riches is just foolish, because they're just robbing Peter to pay Paul. If they want to make the libertarian solution to making Australia more productive is that the government doesn't try to make the Australia more productive. It simply gets out of the way of productive people. You can't make you and I productive. You can't make you and I slaves, or you can't make you and I work more. We will only do it if we want to. And we will want to do it if we stand to gain and we stand to benefit. So the way to, quote unquote, make Australia productive is to get out of the way, tax us less, reduce regulation, make it easy for you and I to conduct business, conduct trade. Then Australia will be prosperous. And that's what we need to move towards. You can go and look at one of my favorite things to reference is the Cato Freedom Index. The Freedom Index ranks the world has about 200 countries. It ranks all of the countries according to how free they are. Now, they've got about 40 different metrics, how sound money is, because if your money is experiencing hyperinflation, it's not very useful. You'd get a lower score in that. If you've got women's rights, then you've got a higher score. If you've got free speech, then you've got a higher score. If your judicial system can't be trusted, you've got a lower freedom score, right? And they rank every country every year for the past 25 years, I think it is. And what you can see is a consistent trend that the countries that have higher economic freedom, being lower taxes, more assurity in your private property, sound money, those countries they are so much more economically prosperous. We can look at Singapore. It's a tiny city state with about 50 million people, no natural resources, but it's got the highest economic freedom index score of any country in the world, and its people are massively productive. Australia's got quite a good economic freedom score, and as a consequence, we're quite productive. We've slipped quite a few places. We used to be ranked 5th in the freedom index. We're now ranked 10th, and set to slide a few more places as a consequence of the COVID era. But the takeaway point is that if you want to make Australia more productive, if you want a brighter future for Australians, the next generation, our kids, what you want is a smaller government that taxes you less and gets out of your way. Then we will have a productive and beautiful country.
The government is, when they brought in those taxations on CGT and corporate taxes and taxes on trusts, the government said we are investing a lot in these businesses by instant asset write-offs or R&D funding, things like that. Do you think the government is actually supporting small businesses, or is it giving initially and taking a cut later, a big cut, 50%, 47% cut later?
This kind of touches on what I said just a moment ago about robbing Peter to take Paul. They're taking money from one place and they're giving it to small business. Now, the interesting thing about the government subsidizing a small business or giving out small business loans, whatever jargon they want to use, is that I've never seen one. I've never seen, I can see on the West Australian federal budget next to me that it says that the government's going to give away, $10 billion to small businesses. I've never met a small business owner that's received this money. Have you? A genuine question. Do you know anybody that's received free money from the government?
They're not giving. They are saying that if you buy something, we'll allow you to write it off now instead of spreading it across the years. That's the only thing they are doing. So they are letting go of some taxes which would have been used later now. But if you are going to tax me later on, what's the point?
Yeah, it's just a tax offset. Now, to be fair, I would prefer that system whereby it's a bit rough to tax a brand new business in their first 2 years. 60% of startup businesses fail in their first 2 years. So when people have invested their startup costs, to tax them in those first 2 years might be a bit rough, which is why we often see people offset, or businesses offset their taxes, their current profits from losses 10 years ago. And people often get upset about that, and I understand why. But those people tend to not understand that, yeah, this company is making a big profit now, but they made a big loss in their startup for the first 5 years. It's only now that they're making a profit. Yeah, I would, again, prefer that the government stayed out of it. I don't think the government should be picking winners and losers. I don't think the government should be giving $1 million here and $10 million there. What they're essentially trying to do is buy votes. Now, one thing that they've just announced is that they're going to give every West Australian driver's license holder $100. Right. Well, there's about 2 million people in WA with a driver's license. Do the math pretty quick. That's $200 million they're giving out. Well, they're not giving it out. They're giving us back our money. That's our money to begin with, and yet they're giving it back to us, and they want a pat on the back and a vote at the next election. And furthermore, it's going to cost us $11 million to administer that handout of $200 million. So to get $100 from the government, which was mine to begin with, it's going to cost us $211 million, and our government is already at $1.05 trillion worth of debt now. That's federal debt. The state debt is about $40 billion, which is about 7% of GSP. But the takeaway is, why are they spending money? Why are they giving out money to you and I when they are $40 billion in debt? They're adding another $211 million to that debt. That is terrible finances. You and I would never do such a thing. Why are they doing it? Obviously, to win favor, win votes. That's what they do. They're giving you back your money, and people will fall for it because they've fallen for it before. Now, they did the same thing at the recent election at the federal level. They said, if you've got a HECS debt, we're going to wipe 20%. Well, what that is, it's your money. It's your money to begin with. We're going to take it off. It's not free, all right? It doesn't come from thin air, all right? You're going to have to pay it back. You're going to have to pay it back later. And the government is just picking winners and losers and trying to win votes. And I find it disgusting when they try to do it with your own money. And I find it sad when people fall for it as well.
On the HEX loan, it's so interesting that the government is actually taxing the parents to pay the children.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, that's exactly correct.
Basically.
Yeah, right. And if I've never been to university, I don't want to go through that institution. There are things that I want to learn from, but I can learn them for free online. I've got an economics professor that I communicate with in the United States. He's retired now. We're just friends, and he teaches me economics, and I just study it because I love it. I love learning about economics. And this day and age, with YouTube and all the resources of the internet, you can learn anything you want to online. But people go to university in order to get that education that they think they need from a university. And in many cases, you do. As I said, I haven't been, so there's probably lots of things you can't, or maybe is best to learn at a university. The other thing they get is that piece of paper at the end that says, I'm qualified as this person or that person. And that piece of paper, that thing is useful. It's a signal that you can take to your employer and say, hey, look, I've learned this stuff. You can trust me. I can do that job that you're looking for someone to do. But in terms of funding it, I see no reason that the student shouldn't fund it. But at the last election, we had parents vote to tax themselves so that they could give the money to the government could give it to the students, and the students would vote for Labor. And I find it morally egregious. If I was to stand at the polling booths at the next election and hand $20 to people to vote for the Libertarian Party, I would be rightly arrested and taken to jail. But for some reason, even though I'm using my money in that scenario, if I was the government, if I was Anthony Albanese, I could take money out of his pocket, hand it to you, and then ask you to vote for me, and that's perfectly legal. Again, this is how the West conducts its corruption. Whereas in other places in the world, you could just stand at the polling booth and intimidate people into voting for you, or pay them and bribe them. But we do it differently in the West. We do it through taxes and democracy, and therefore it's legitimate.
On that $100 that the West Australian government is giving every license holder, it's so interesting because in the same budget, the government has increased the utilities cost and all those charges that the government puts I think by $115 overall. So they increase it by $115 and they think they will give you $100. So you are already at loss by $15. Then you have to go and download their app, put your details in, do all that work in the time in which you could have done something else. So you're reducing your productivity. And then you get that $100. So you apply, it's become available in July. You get it in September. And then you spend another $11 million in managing that whole scheme. And you're spending, I think, $40 million, something like that, to manage that service app.
It's
For what? You just give, or they say, we are not going to increase the utilities cost this year. Everyone benefits by doing nothing, just one line. That's it.
Look, and isn't it the perfect example of them trying to buy votes? You know, if they really wanted to help you and I, all they would need to do is saying, we're not going to tax you $100 this year. But they don't get the handshake, they don't get the high five, they don't get the media coverage that they need. You know, giving someone $100, if you've got that photo opportunity of the Premier of Australia, of WA, Roger Cook, handing $100 to someone with a driver's license, that's a media opportunity. That's going to boost your signal. That's going to get you votes. But if you just reduce people, if you just take less of people's money, it doesn't get you the same hype, the same clout that they need in order to win the next election. But if they really cared about you, if they actually wanted to make the cost of living crisis a little bit easier, they could just reduce your taxes. We've seen it at the petrol bowser. Now, currently, the Labor government has introduced a temporary reduction in the fuel excise tax. And it's interesting when people decide to understand economics, because typically when you talk about, you know, taxing the petro companies, people are like, well, of course, you know, they're making billions of dollars, we should tax them. And, you know, I'm not necessarily opposed to that. But the idea, once it starts to affect you, everyone seems to understand it. Now, the Labor government has introduced this temporary cut. The Liberal Party proposed it at the last election, 32 cents off every dollar at the fuel bowser. The Libertarian Party proposed this and pulled a stunt where we paid your fuel excise at the bowser over a year and a half ago. So they're both just stealing our ideas and marketing them as their own, right? Except what did they do? They watered down our idea. Our idea, the libertarian idea, was to cut the fuel excise because, as I said before, the businesses don't pay the taxes. They collect them on behalf of the government. It's you, the consumer, that is paying that fuel excise when you're at the bowser every time, not the petrol station. And what the Libertarian Party proposes is that we remove the fuel excises at all. Now, the fuel excise is meant to be used in order to fund the payment of roads. But the fuel excise goes into the general bucket. It's not segregated and used specifically for roads. And in fact, the roads cost less than the fuel excise. So you could cut some of the fuel excise and it still wouldn't have an effect on roads, even if they put it in a separate bucket, which they don't. So yeah, our solution is to remove the fuel excise altogether. A Liberal stole our idea for the last election, watered it down, and the Labor Party has introduced it temporarily as opposed to what we would do, which is remove it permanently.
Yeah, you should. There's another thing you talked about taxing the big business. Australia has two set of taxation for corporates, 30% for large and 25% for small businesses. One, what it does is, if I have and this has happened in India, happens all the time, that if I have a small business, I get all these subsidies and benefits and lower taxation. So I will never grow my business beyond the point. I'll always keep at that and then start a new business in my wife's name. And I have another small business and I can keep doing that. So it creates that distortion. But the bigger thing is OECD countries on an average have 23% corporate tax. Hungary has got 9, Singapore 17. Do you think we should go down to your proposed of 20% or even lower, say 10% like Hungary?
What the ideal tax rate is not exactly clear. As I said before, there's the Laffer curve, which indicates that there's an optimal point at which government raises revenue. I'm opposed to the idea of government trying to maximize its revenue because I don't think government is a revenue-oriented service that we didn't institute the government in order to make money. You and I instituted government because we wanted to protect our rights. We don't want somebody to come and rob us. That's why we have police. We don't want a foreign nation to come here and enslave the people, which is why we have a defense force, right? These are the reasons that we instituted government, not it is not the purpose of government to maximize its revenue. And so I don't want that. Yeah, as for the optimal level of taxation, I'm not sure. I would probably, I mean, as a libertarian, I'm always going to say lower, right? I would like to see, I don't think that government should spend any more than 10% of GDP. At the moment, our government is spending 34% of our GDP. I think that's egregiously high. That means it's taking 66% of, or rather, you and I are only left with 66%. They're spending the other 34. I think that it should be capped at 10%. In terms of what they tax and how much, I don't want them to tax, specific industries or specific sectors in this way or that way. I think it should just be, I want the tax code to be so simple that we don't have any need for tax accountants. So I would advocate for it to be lower. Yeah, I think that answers the question.
There's another very interesting taxation on companies and corporates, payroll tax, which is basically a penalty for you. If you hired more people, we are going to tax you more.
Yeah.
And how does that work? Do you need that taxation? I would say get rid of it, but we are where we are.
I love everything you're saying. I'm so glad that you're a libertarian and you just haven't come out of the closet yet. So at the moment, Australia has this thing called payroll tax. And if you have a certain number of employees or one too many employees, you trigger this payroll tax. It is a tax on productivity. And once again, the Libertarian Party thinks that we should scrap it. Add it to the list of taxes that we should scrap. Capital gains tax, get rid of that. Income tax, reduce it massively. Payroll tax, get rid of that entirely. So payroll tax, just taxes. The idea was that they would implement it and it would only hit the biggest businesses, McDonald's or Amazon or whatever, the big greedy corporations. And because they're large, they can suffer the tax burden. The reality is that it prevented a whole bunch of other companies from expanding and becoming the next thing that replaces Amazon or McDonald's. Because of the payroll tax, it discourages people from employing that one more employee because then it triggers this tax. And just like you said, people do this thing where they then franchise their business or create a separate business in their wife's name or a separate business in their eldest son's name, right? In order to avoid this taxation. And it is a tax on productivity, and we should get rid of it because Australia will be more productive. There will be more businesses able to compete with those large monopoly duopolies that we all hate, right? If you want to see Coles and Woolies come down a peg, what you need to do is get rid of payroll tax, right? They are already suffering it. They're going to cop it. In fact, they have an incentive to advocate for keeping payroll tax and keeping minimum wage because they are already able to suffer that burden. They're not going to ever escape payroll tax. But if they can get the government to increase the payroll tax, it prevents their competitor, that new up-and-coming company. West Australia, the rest of Australia, if you can hear this, West Australia has this fantastic business by Tony Gallardi, the Spud Shed, right? Spud Shed is an up-and-comer. It's competing against Coles and Woolies in West Australia. That company definitely has payroll tax. But there would have been a point where Tony Gallardi had to say, are we going to keep this a small thing and avoid this payroll tax, or are we going to punch through it and push so hard and employ so many people that we are just going to compete with them? He decided to do that. But think about all the other small fresh fruit grocers who decided, no, it's not worth my hassle. It's not worth the extra money. I'm never going to be that big. I don't want that mental or financial burden because it triggers payroll tax. If we didn't have the payroll tax, those companies might have decided, yeah, you know what? I'll employ one more person. And we've got more jobs for teenagers out there and more economic productivity. So scrap that tax too.
Let's come to the focus of this government on benefiting the workers, the lower workers, and helping with the cost of living. Over the last 5 years or 5 cycles of tax benefits, they have given about $2,500 back to the workers. In the same period, the inflation has increased their tax liability by 8%. Again, paying here and taking from here.
Yep.
Why can't we get out of this? How is the worker benefiting?
Yeah. Inflation is a tax without representation. So the government is debasing your currency right now. It is inflating away the purchasing power that you have. So $100 from 50 years ago could purchase so much more than what it can today. One of the common indexes that people point to is the Big Mac index. How much can one of your dollars, or rather, how much does a Big Mac cost? And that's a way to measure inflation. So with the government printing more money, they also get the first benefit. The government prints the money, they get to spend it first. And then you and I suffer the inflation later on. So the Libertarian Party, we haven't got an official policy on this, but we advocate to moving towards either a free banking system or a commodities-backed system. Now, a commodity-backed system such as gold-backed, which I think most people are familiar with the concept, is not, there's nothing inherently special about gold. It's just a shiny metal. But the benefit is that because it's not a fiat currency, the government can't print it arbitrarily. The amount of money is fixed by the amount of gold that we have in the country. And because it's fixed, the government can't print it and the government can't spend that money and spend us into debt. But with a fiat currency, they're free to just run up inflation. And I think inflation is at 4.6% off the top of my head at the moment, which is terribly high. The RBA's mandate is to keep it below 2 or between 1 and 2%, and they have a dual mandate, which is to keep inflation between 1 and 2% and to keep unemployment at 5%. And they're failing at both of those right now.
Right. So another thing which is in the economy so heavily, and the government has no answer probably for it, is the AI and automation. Our wage costs are so high that either the manufacturing goes to some other country or the businesses here will keep introducing AI and automation to reduce the costs. Altasian has, I'm not sure, but I think they have let go of a lot of people. Facebook has done it. Google has done it. I think X or the Twitter has taken out, I think 60% of their workforce. How do you think the Australian taxation system, which is so reliant on income taxes, going to manage when there's AI and automation? There's no one to pay those taxes.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting problem for the government of the day to solve. So with AI taking a lot of jobs, this is in economics what's known as creative destruction. So and people often freak out, or I remember when ChatGPT was first released about 3 or 4 years ago, every YouTube thumbnail was about, how AI is going to destroy the world and how it's going to take your job. And these are the jobs that are safe from AI. The reality is that AI is going to make us massively more productive and all of us a lot wealthier. Now, it will come at the cost of some individuals whose jobs will no longer be needed to be done by that individual. That industry might disappear, or most likely it will massively shrink. But we can compare this to the horse and cart 100 years ago. Once upon a time, there was all this industry around horses, leather makers, shoes for horses, horse and carriage, right? That sort of thing. And then the car came along and it destroyed this industry, but nobody could have predicted all of the jobs that would be created as a consequence of the car, of the Model T. These days we've got F1. There are entire companies that all they do is make tires, and they make lots and lots of different types of tires. We've got companies that just do suspension, just do brakes. There are so many industries that have been created as a consequence of the car that massively outweigh the loss that we took from the destruction of the horse industry, the horse and buggy. So AI is going to do the same thing. It's going to make everybody a lot more productive. It's going to reduce, there's going to be some temporary pain as people's jobs modify and change. But those people who lose jobs at Twitter or Facebook or whatever company it might be, they're going to go on and find something new and productive to do in those new jobs. When I speak to teenagers at the moment, university students, or rather specifically high school students who say, what should I study at university? I'm in my last year of year 12. What should I go and study? I say to them, take a broad course in your first year, because if you want to specialize in this particular job, just know that the job you are going to do from age 40 and onwards hasn't been created yet. The thing that you're going to do hasn't been invented. Right? Once upon a time, there was no such thing as podcasts. There was no such thing as social media influencers. Now you and I are doing a podcast. There are people like Joe Rogan who are social media influencers. That job didn't exist when I was growing up. Right? AI, same thing. It's going to destroy some jobs, but it's going to create a lot more. As for the income tax base, I will be glad to see the government get a lot less of our income taxes, because they don't spend our money well enough that we should be making extra contributions. So what comes in the future, I'm not sure, but I'll be glad to see the government get less of your money.
You said you want the government to have less money. The natural question to ask is, how are we, like, if you reduce the payroll tax, you reduce the corporation tax, you reduce income tax, how are we going to fund, or the government will say, and the government has said, how are we going to fund all the services? They never talk about social welfare spending. How are we going to fund those services and social welfare?
Yeah, and that is the natural question. If we were to get rid of this tax, what are we going to do to replace it? And I've already said I don't want to remove one bad tax and implement another bad one. Our solution is to reduce government spending. The government does not spend your money well. The Australian Human Rights Commission costs the Australian taxpayer about $50 million. Now, it's got a great name, Australian Human Rights Commission. You and I, we care about Australian human rights. But guess what they just did? They just entered into the Tickle v. Giggle case on the side of the transgender woman who won, or transgender man who won that court case, stating that there is no difference between a biological woman and a transgender woman. Obviously, that is a bunch of baloney. That's what the Australian taxpayer is spending their money on. $50 million a year to go to that. We also have the Sexual Discrimination Commissioner. She gets paid $400,000 a year. $1,000 a year. And guess what she just did? She just argued that there is no difference. There is no such thing as biological sex. There is no difference between male and female. She has essentially argued herself out of a job. If there is no difference between the sexes, then there is no sexual discrimination, and she is the Sexual Discrimination Commissioner, and there is no point to her job title. Okay, so that's the kind of government waste that we have going on. And when I say get rid of taxes and reduce government, I don't mean reduce the amount of ADF soldiers that we have. I don't mean we need to spend less money on roads or on schools or on hospitals. I mean get rid of that crap. And there is a lot of it. We're at $1.05 trillion of debt. Even if that stuff didn't exist, it is still unacceptably high. The NDIS has been shown to be massively fraudulent. That's where your money is getting spent. That's where your money is getting wasted. We can reduce that waste, remove those departments altogether. Okay, we do not need the Australian Human Rights Commission. We just need Australian human rights. They just need to be codified. The most important human right that we have, in my opinion, is free speech. Well, maybe self-defense might come first, but free speech is the libertarian most important thing that we are fighting for and will continue to fight for. We don't have it in Australia. We don't have it enshrined in our constitution with a Bill of Rights. What has the Australian Human Rights Commission done on that front? Nothing. But one Libertarian MP, John Ruddock, over in New South Wales, has repeatedly tried to introduce a carbon copy of the US First Amendment into the New South Wales Constitution. He hasn't won. Do you know why? Because Liberal and Labor have voted against him. It would have passed if the Liberal Party voted for it. But of course, the Liberal Party isn't actually liberal anymore. They don't believe in classic liberalism or in freedom, and they voted against it. What is the Australian Human Rights Commission doing? Nothing. They're wasting your money. What are all these other government departments that you and I couldn't even name right now? What are they doing? Nothing. The ATO needs to be reduced by about 90%. There's your savings. You don't need all these taxes in Australia. They are chewing up our economic productivity. And if we reduce the size of government, we could afford the things that we actually need. Roads, schools, hospitals, defence. Okay? That's what the government should be focusing on.
Yeah, you talked about the Sex Discrimination Commissioner earning $400,000 and speaking whatever. No one talks about why they are all doing it. The Labour government under Julia Gillard changed the Sex Discrimination Act. Being a female, changed the definition of female in the Act, because of which there is a case, because of which a Human Rights Commission has to get involved in it. People are spending and losing their business. Sally Grover is losing her business to fight these cases, and everything is on a flow-on effect from that change, what that Labour Prime Minister did. So the blame lies there, but I understand the kind of mess that they created. I think the Snowy Hydro was initially costed at $2 or $3 billion. Now it's $42 billion and still not completed.
Exactly. Another perfect example of how the government is wasting your money. These are the kinds of wastes that we can get rid of, right? So Snowy Hydro 2.0 is now at $42 billion. It's blown out it's had two increases from 20 billion to another 20 billion. Now, Nirmal or anybody out there, if you're hearing this podcast, please email me at presidentwa@libertarians.com.au and tell me the answer to this question. Name one time that the government has come in under budget and on time. because I can't think of a single time that the government has come in under budget and on time. Not one. So they don't spend your money well.
I'll tell you something. What is the icon of Australia?
Well, kangaroo.
Sorry?
The kangaroo. Oh, landmark. Uluru.
It's their natural, the Opera House.
Opera House, Sydney Opera House. Yeah.
That was also over budget and over time.
Yeah. And it was designed by a Danish man. Yep.
But that was also over budget and over time. So that's our, in nature in Australia, our icon, our symbol of Australia is over budget and over time.
Yep. Yep. I think the government causes a lot more problems than it solves. It is a necessary evil, but it needs to be reduced massively in size. The Australian people are suffering under the weight of the government that we have at the moment. And just one more thing on the Sexual Discrimination Act. As you said, it was changed by Julia Gillard, which is a Labor Prime Minister in 2013. She removed the definition of what a woman was back then. And we're seeing the consequences of that change now. If you want to know a little bit more, there's also a soccer team known as the Flying Bats. This is a female soccer team who have walked onto the field and then walked off the field a few times, because in the female league, you're able to have transgender men. So there's another team that has 5 men, and those men have knocked out women, broken legs on the soccer pitch. And as a consequence, there is this other female team, which is actually full of just women, and they have forfeited games. Well, as a consequence of this and drawing attention to their plight, they don't want to play against men. They only want to play against women. Their new contract states that they are not allowed to forfeit a game. If an individual forfeits a game, one of those women, they will be fired. The contract terminated right then and there. If there was ever an argument to say that the patriarchy is back and bigger than ever before, this is it. Men are forcing their way into women's sports. They're forcing their way into women's bathrooms. It's disgusting. And a government that can't define what a woman is doesn't deserve to be in power. They are divorced from reality, from logic, from the Australian people. 98% of the Australian public knows what a woman is. It is there's a small minority that wants to claim men can be women, that chicks with dicks are just as valid as chicks with a uterus. And it's just ridiculous. You know, we all know the truth, and I've had enough of it. To plug the Libertarian Party once again, we've had our policy on women, which is basically just that we know what a woman is. We state it in clear, and we stated it 4 or 5 years ago, you know, when we were building our website. So where Australia is at in terms of gender relations is just ridiculous.
Libertarians have also suggested in reducing the size of the business, to get rid of ABC, SBS, Future Fund, NBN. Now, SBS and ABC cost us about $1.6 billion a year.
Yep.
To create videos which no one watches. Actually, they actually came out with a survey saying, who wants to go on a subscription basis for ABC and SBS? No one liked it.
Nope. Yep.
NBN is, I think, at the moment $45 billion. And Future Fund is $230 billion.
Yep. Perfect.
How will you take that forward? How will we have internet?
How will we have internet? Well, it's funny that we spent some $40 billion on the NBN, because Elon Musk came out only a few years later, provided something better and cheaper. I can get Starlink on my roof for $100 a month, but the NBN cost me $40 billion and put us further into debt. You know, the government has got the ABC and the SBS, and it costs you and I billions of dollars a year to put out propaganda against Ben Roberts-Smith that you and I don't even agree with. And yet I'm not watching it. I haven't plugged in my TV to the antenna in 10 years. I've got Netflix, Paramount, and Prime, and all the rest of it. And that's where I watch stuff. And if I want to get the news, I go onto YouTube. It's free, provided I've got my Starlink connection. Why? These are more examples of waste that we can cut from the government. If the ABC was truly valuable, it would be able to survive on its own, but it's not. And we can prove that by just offering it up to the market. Nobody wants to pay a subscription. Well, evidently the people don't value it, and we're forced to pay for it. One of the most egregious things that you can do to a man is take his money and spend it on things that he opposes. I'm opposed to the ABC and the SBS existing. They are literally government-owned propaganda mouthpieces. They are government news and media. I don't want that. I want free media, free market media, like what you and I are doing right now. I've got a YouTube channel. I can talk to people, and if people want to listen to what I say, then they'll listen. Then they'll click on the video and watch it the whole way through. But the ABC and the SBS, they get funded no matter what, even if nobody tunes in. And apparently, people aren't tuning in. Okay, but yet the government wants to fund it because it buys them votes and it allows them to put out their message and their media, and it costs them nothing. It costs you and me. And there are more examples of what we would sell. The Libertarian Party would sell the ABC, sell the SBS, get what we can from that. The Future Fund, which I believe is meant to be, as the name suggests, is meant to be setting us up for our future. What? How much money did you say it's got in it? $200
$230 billion.
How much? Sorry.
200.
$230 billion. Well, that's great. All right. I love investing for the future. But we've got $1.05 trillion worth of debt. All right. If we're worried about the future, what are we doing with this future fund? Take all that money, put it on the debt, pay off that debt, because we're paying interest on the debt right now. That interest is in the hundreds of millions right now. Right, there is money you and I are paying as taxes that is not even going towards paying down the debt. It's just paying the interest. Ridiculous. So yeah, we would sell the ABC, SBS, use that money to pay down the debt, reduce those costs for government, and then consequently reduce taxes for the Australian people afterwards.
Look towards closing. The government, we said that all the changes all together will get the government about $77 to $80 billion in the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see the direct consequences and indirect consequences of these changes in the, say, next 10 years?
The government's going to increase their revenue by $80 billion. Well, I bet they increase their spending to $100 billion. Did you know that for every dollar the Australian government collects as revenue, they spend $1.2? So that's a calculation that the Australian Budget Office calculates. You can see the same thing with in the United States with their Congressional Budget Office, the CBO. For every dollar that comes into the government, they spend 1.2. So apparently, if we want to reduce government spending, what we need to reduce is also the taxation, because then they'll spend less money. $80 billion in revenue they're going to collect. Again, I think that's just a travesty and not something to be bragged about. That's $80 billion out of your pocket that you could spend on things that you want. And if you wanted them, you would spend your money on them. Apparently, you don't want the things that the government is spending money on. You don't want the ABC, SBS. You don't want the Australian Human Rights Commission that can't define what a woman is. You don't want the Sex Discrimination Minister. You don't want to pay her salary. I don't want. And what I find more egregious and disgusting, if I can take a bit of a tangent, is that come the next election, the Labor government and the Liberal Party helped them pass this legislation. Wherever your primary vote goes, that party gets $5. So your first vote is the most valuable vote you can give. $5 goes to whichever party you put as number one. Whatever you put as number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's where your vote goes. We got rid of group voting tickets back in 2016, though Victoria does still have them for some silly reason. Now the rest of Australia uses proportional representation and the runoff vote, which is a much better system. It means that you cannot waste your vote. It's actually, I really endorse Australia's voting system. It's much better than America's first past the post voting system. But yeah, they're going to take $5 of my money and they may give it to the Greens because somebody else might vote for the Greens. And I'm totally opposed to that. I don't think that your tax dollars should go to funding the Libertarian Party. I think that's disgusting. If you want to fund the Libertarian Party, then you can donate $5. Just go to libertarians.org and click on the donate button. If you want to give money to the Labor Party, then you can give it to them. But the Labor Party and the Liberal Party are receiving less and less donations. Their support base is drying up. They're getting less votes each election. And there's more and more independents and small parties winning a seat here and a seat there. I know that we all think it's dire straits at the moment, but change is slow, especially political change. And what did the Liberal and Labor Party do in reaction to this change in voting demographics? Well, they didn't change their policies. They didn't reduce taxation and pay down the debt. No, they decided to vote themselves more of your money. So it's called the Snouts in the Trough Bill, derisively from the Tasmanian minister. I forget her name now. She's a big tent populist, but Jackie Lambie, that's who it is. But yeah, they're just going to vote themselves more of your money. So $80 billion, they'll spend that within a year anyway. It doesn't matter that they're going to collect that extra revenue. It's not going to go towards paying off the debt.
Right. And you said that there's three proposals that you're putting in 50% tax free threshold, then 20% tax rate, and 20% of all corporate taxes and things like that. If you are in a government, which sequence you'll go to do those things, or you'll do them all together?
Tell you, if I were in power, king for a day, although libertarians are quite opposed to the idea of kings, king for a day, the first thing I would do for the Australian people would be to constitutionalise free speech. I would introduce a carbon copy of the US First Amendment. And the reason that I think that we should use the US First Amendment is that it has stood the test of time. It operates on 5 really important words, which is Congress shall make no law. Now, those 5 words put free speech or put speech beyond the limits or beyond the jurisdiction of politicians. I think that we should institute that into Australia, as it would protect religion, protect speech, and protect the right to protest. And I think by using the US's a carbon copy of the US, you get all of their case law. So things such as the Brandenburg test, which determines when speech incites someone to violence and when you can prosecute them for that speech. That would be the first thing I would do. After that, I would then go about reducing taxation, and then I would go about cutting spending, though those two things do need to happen at first. The reason that I would start by reducing taxation is that it returns more money to the people. Now, I always have to consider the possibility that I won't be able to reduce that spending afterwards. Politics is a dirty game of give and take, and you have to work with those other parties. And those other parties might not want to reduce spending on this thing or that thing. Everyone's got their personal pet project, the thing that they think they need to spend money on. And if I can't reduce spending, I want to return that money to the people as fast as possible because it's their money to begin with.
And what's your last message to anyone who's listening or viewing this?
Anybody that's listening, if you like the ideas of an older, classical, more liberal government, whereby we protect free speech, we protect the individual, we can define what a woman is. If those are ideas that resonate with you, check out the Libertarian Party. And if the Libertarian Party is not for you, I encourage you to check out other smaller parties. Check out Gerard Rennick's People's First Party. Check out One Nation if that's what you're into. There's lots of small parties, but please do not vote for more of the same. The duopoly of Liberal and Labor needs to end. And those two parties, they claim to be different. They claim to be red and blue, but really they are just the same. They are exactly the same because they vote on all the same stuff. They vote together. Labor introduces a bill. Liberal Party says they oppose it, but then they vote for it. They vote together. Do not trust Liberal and Labor. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if they promise you the world. If they have no integrity, if you can't trust them to follow through, then their promises are meaningless. Give another party a chance. Vote for one of those smaller parties. Make sure your first vote goes to a party that you want to give money to. And then after that, make sure your preferences flow down the list. So I would say that. And to anybody that's not involved in a political party yet, let me just say this. All political parties need to have a minimum of 500 registered members in order to appear on the ballot. So if there's a new up-and-coming party that you want to be a part of or that you want to see appear on the ballot, consider going to their website and filling out their form. It's an FD25. It takes about 60 seconds, especially with autofill these days. And you can help that party appear on the ballot. That's their first step to legitimacy. So help those smaller parties. It doesn't take much to make a difference. It really, really does not. Just an hour here or sending a message or whatever it might be. Get engaged because politics is a lot easier to influence than you might think. You don't need billions of dollars and a lobbyist in order to make change.
And where can people find you and the Libertarian Party?
Yeah, so if you want to find me personally, you can email me. You can find my email on the website, presidentwa@libertarians.org.au, .com.au. If you want to find me specifically, Jordan Woodhams, I've got a YouTube channel. It's got the same name, Jordan Woodhams Policy Principle. I talk about upcoming policies and their effect that they're going to have. So I made a really great video that included Punters Politics, where we talked about hate speech laws that were coming in. I talk a lot about government waste. It's an interesting thing of mine. My personal passion is economics. I love economics, particularly microeconomics. I study it because it's fun and incredibly insightful. I just wish everybody enjoyed it as much as I do. So those are the two ways to connect with me, either by email through the Libertarian Party, or you can find me on YouTube, Instagram, all those things.
Wonderful. On that note, thank you, Jordan, for all the time and insights and things you have shared.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate that you reached out to us. I hope that we get to do it again, because I think you and I have got a lot in common. I think we've got a lot of common interests.
Absolutely. We'll talk soon again.
All right. Thank you so much, Nirmal.
Thank you.